At 11 in the morning, while sunlight poured across the windows and children were laughing somewhere down the street, Mara stood on a stranger's porch in a soaked black dress, shaking so badly that she could barely keep her hands together. Her voice was almost lost beneath the heavy rain as she looked at the man in the doorway and whispered the words that would change both their lives forever. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" The man, a tired single father named Everett Hale, stared at her in stunned silence. He had seen people ask for money, food, favors, even forgiveness. But he had never seen a woman look as frightened as Mara did at that moment. And what Everett did next would prove that sometimes the greatest act of love begins with opening a door for someone who has nowhere else to go. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes people deserve kindness, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of helping someone when they need it most. Everett had learned years earlier that life could change in a single phone call. His wife, Celia, had died unexpectedly after an illness that had slowly drained the family's strength, leaving him alone with his 8-year-old daughter, Juniper, and 1,000 responsibilities he had never expected to carry by himself. Since then, Everett had become the kind of man who woke before sunrise, packed school lunches, worked long hours repairing commercial air conditioning systems, rushed home to cook dinner, helped with homework, washed clothes late at night, and still tried to smile when Juniper asked if he thought her mother could somehow see her from heaven. He never complained. He simply kept moving because stopping meant feeling everything he had lost. Their small white house was modest, but it was clean, warm, and filled with the little things Celia had once loved: family pictures, handmade decorations, old books, and a faded yellow mug that Everett still could not bring himself to throw away. That Saturday morning had begun peacefully. Juniper was sitting at the kitchen table drawing a colorful picture of their family while Everett fixed a loose cabinet hinge. The sky outside had been bright only an hour earlier, but dark clouds suddenly rolled across the neighborhood, turning the afternoon gray. Then the rain came down hard, almost without warning. Everett was carrying a basket of clean laundry toward the hallway when he heard a knock at the front door. At first he assumed it was one of Juniper's friends. But when he opened it, Mara was standing there, completely drenched, her wet hair stuck against her face, her breathing uneven, and a small brown suitcase clutched in one trembling hand. She looked like someone who had been running from something much bigger than the rain. Everett immediately noticed that she had no coat, no umbrella, and no phone in her hand. Her eyes were red, but she was trying desperately not to cry. She explained that she had been staying with a relative across town, but an argument had turned frightening, and she had been told to leave. She had nowhere to sleep, nowhere to go, and only a few dollars in her purse. She had remembered Everett because months earlier, he had helped carry groceries for her at a neighborhood market when she had been struggling with too many bags. They had barely spoken that day, but he had been kind to her. Now, with desperation swallowing her pride, she had walked through the rain because his house was the only place she could think of. When she whispered her request about sleeping there, Everett felt 100 questions rush through his mind. He was a single father. He had a young daughter in the next room. He barely knew Mara. He understood how easily a misunderstood situation could become something dangerous for his reputation, his work, and his child. But as he looked at her face, he realized something more important. She was not asking for romance. She was asking for safety. Everett stepped aside and quietly told her she could come in. He did not ask her to explain everything immediately. He simply handed her a clean towel, turned on the heater, and told Juniper that their guest needed help. Juniper, without hesitation, ran upstairs and returned carrying a soft blue blanket she loved. She pressed it into Mara's hands as if welcoming her into the family. Mara broke down completely. She covered her face and cried in the middle of their hallway, embarrassed and exhausted. Everett did not stare. He did not judge. He simply gave her space and then prepared a bowl of warm soup while Juniper found dry clothes that were too large but comfortable enough to wear. For the first time in weeks, Mara sat somewhere without being afraid of what would happen next. As the rain continued outside, Everett learned more about her life. Mara had spent years caring for her younger brother after their parents died, sacrificing school, friendships, and nearly every personal dream. When her brother moved away for work, she suddenly found herself without the one person who had made all the sacrifice feel meaningful. Then her job at a local event company disappeared after the business closed. She had bounced between temporary work and borrowed rooms, pretending everything was fine because she hated being seen as helpless. The relative she had been staying with had promised she could remain there while she found work, but resentment had grown inside the household. That morning, the situation had become unbearable. Mara kept apologizing for disturbing Everett's life, but he told her she was not disturbing it. He told her that people sometimes needed help before they could become strong again. Those words hit her harder than anything else because she realized no one had said anything like that to her in a very long time. That night never became what people might have imagined from Mara's desperate question. Everett made the safest possible arrangement. Mara slept in the guest room, Juniper slept in her own room, and Everett rested on the couch downstairs. He wanted Mara to understand that kindness did not come with a hidden price. Before turning off the lights, he left a glass of water beside her bed and placed a note on the table reminding her that she did not owe him anything for being treated with dignity. The next morning, the house felt strangely different. Mara woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Juniper laughing downstairs. Sunlight had replaced the storm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mara opened a window and breathed fresh air without fear. Juniper asked her to help finish the family drawing she had started the day before. Mara hesitated, then smiled and sat beside her. Over the next few days, Everett helped Mara search for work. He drove her to interviews when his schedule allowed, shared leads from people he knew, and encouraged her to stop apologizing every time someone offered help. Mara eventually found a temporary administrative position at a small community center. It was not glamorous, and the pay was modest, but it was a beginning. She began saving money for a room of her own. She also started helping Everett with small things around the house, not because he demanded it, but because she needed to feel useful again. Slowly, the house became brighter. Juniper began looking forward to coming home from school because Mara would sometimes help her with art projects. Everett discovered that he laughed more than he had in years. He found himself sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, listening to Mara talk about her dreams instead of only thinking about bills and responsibilities. But he was careful. He knew grief had taught him not to confuse loneliness with love. Mara was equally careful because she knew how dangerous it could be to depend emotionally on the first person who offered kindness. Then, one afternoon, Everett received devastating news. The company he worked for had lost its biggest contract, and several employees, including him, were going to be laid off. He came home carrying an envelope in his hand and tried to hide his worry. He sat quietly at the kitchen table while Juniper practiced reading aloud. Mara noticed the expression on his face and immediately understood that something was wrong. Everett had spent years believing that he had to protect everyone. He had built his entire identity around being the strong one. But that afternoon, for the first time, he allowed someone else to see how scared he really was. He admitted that he did not know how he would pay the mortgage, keep Juniper in her school, and survive another month without work. Mara listened without interrupting. Then she opened her small purse and placed the little money she had saved on the table. Everett refused immediately. Mara insisted. She told him that when she had arrived at his door, he had not asked whether she could repay him. He had simply opened the door. Now it was her turn to do something for him. Everett stared at the money, then at Mara, and realized the greatest lesson he had missed for years: sometimes accepting help was not weakness. Sometimes it was another form of trust. The following weeks were difficult, but they were not hopeless. Mara worked extra hours at the community center while Everett took smaller repair jobs. Friends from the neighborhood began recommending him for work. Juniper continued bringing laughter into every difficult day. The three of them discovered that family did not always begin with blood. Sometimes it began with a door being opened at the right moment. Months later, Everett found steady work again. Mara moved into a small apartment nearby, but she remained a constant part of their lives. One bright Saturday afternoon, she stood on Everett's porch and watched Juniper race across the yard with a kite. Everett stood beside her, smiling quietly. Mara looked at the house and remembered the frightened woman who had once arrived there in the rain asking for a place to sleep. She had thought she was asking for shelter for one night. She had no idea she was stepping toward a completely different life. Everett eventually told her that the day she came to his door, he had been afraid too. He had been afraid of making the wrong decision, afraid of gossip, afraid of getting hurt again, and most of all, afraid of letting someone into the fragile world he had built for Juniper. But he realized that if fear controlled every decision, kindness would disappear from the world. Mara smiled through tears and admitted that when she had knocked on his door, she had expected rejection. Instead, she found dignity. She found safety. She found friendship. And eventually, she found a place where her heart could heal. Their story did not end with a perfect house or an easy life. They still had bills, bad days, misunderstandings, and moments when the future felt uncertain. But they had learned something far more valuable. People do not always need someone to save them. Sometimes they only need someone to believe they are worth helping until they can stand on their own again. And that was exactly what Everett had given Mara that rainy day. Not a room. Not just a bed. A second chance. A reminder that she mattered. A reason to believe tomorrow could be better. So, before this story ends, remember the woman standing in the rain and the man who chose not to judge her. Remember that one small act of kindness can become the turning point in a person's entire life. And remember that the people who look strongest from the outside may be silently begging for one safe place to breathe. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy for more emotional stories about kindness, courage, and second chances. Special request, comment "Everyone deserves a second chance" below if you believe one act of kindness can change a life. Because sometimes, the person standing at your door is not there to take something from you. Sometimes, they are there because life has taken almost everything they had. And sometimes, simply opening the door can change everything.